Well, if sweeping historical fiction is your thing, you'll want to hear what Paper Plus book reviewer Kate Goldie has to say about Jane Harris's latest novel.
Buy it immediately. It's fantastic. Jane Harris wrote one other novel, The Observations, which was a very witty, gothic Victorian narrative. And she follows that kind of notion again. She's playing around with genre a little bit. It's set in Glasgow during the Great Exhibition of Glasgow, 1888, I think. Our narrator, Harriet Baxter, falls in with a family, the Gillespie family. The main character in that family is the painter, who she obviously falls in love with, though never says that throughout the novel. But we know she has a kind of fixation on him. He's married with 2 children. He has a crazy sort of organ-playing, hymn-singing mother.
So it's an unrequited love.
It's an unrequited love. That's not actually the point of her narrative. She is writing this memoir some 50 years later from her funny little house in London where she lives with 2 birds in a cage and a slightly sinister nurse. So that's the setup. And we realise as she's unfolding the events that occur over that period in 1888 and for several years, we realise that she's a slightly unreliable narrator. One of my favourite devices in fiction is the unreliable narrator, because after a while you realise there's a slippage between what they're telling you and what is really happening, and that's a very difficult thing to do in a book.
So the writer's deliberately making the narrator be untruthful.
Yeah, except it takes a while for you to pick it up, and it's just in tiny little ways that she describes events that have happened. Now, a tragedy occurs in this Gillespie family, and her involvement in it, you realise after a while, is the sort of question at the heart of the book and the motives behind that. And the whole of her dealings with them culminate in this salacious court case in the early 1890s, which occupies the second half of the book. So as a reader, it's completely compulsively page-turning because quite a lot happens, and because she's such a winning narrator. She's got one of the best narrative voices I've heard for a while. She's very funny. It's quite bawdy, but if you can imagine this, in a sort of elegant way, in a Victorian kind of way. And so the characters are fantastic, she's fantastic. And then there's this developing anxiety about the nurse who's at home with her 50 years later.
She's a bit shonky.
Which is slightly unusual, and you start to realise who she might be. So it's sort of, it's a thriller. It's a funny bodice ripper kind of gothic narrative. So it's very, very good. And even at the end, I sort of instantly wished that there was someone else who'd read it so I could talk to them about it. So I highly recommend it. Fantastic. Can't say the same for Douglas Kennedy.
Oh no.
All I can say about this book is it's bloated, obese. Douglas Kennedy's editor should have said, okay, Douglas, cut it by half. Now, I've always quite liked Douglas Kennedy. He wrote a very sinister, good book called The Dead Heart, which is about a young man's trip through the centre of Australia and his kidnapping by a very odd kind of country town. And that was really good. So I went on and read sort of pretty much everything he's done since then. He had a little motif that went through a number of his novels where there would always be a bottle of Cloudy Bay Sauvignon Blanc in his novels. It was a little sort of MacGuffin or device.
Is he a New Zealander or Australian?
No, he's American.
Oh,
now, as with many, many successful novels, J.K. Rowling being one of the prime examples, the more famous and best-selling they get, the less work the editors do on cutting back what they're doing, the number of words they're using. So someone should have said, Douglas, just pull your head in. It's the story of, again, it's a memoir. It's a guy thinking about a time in the early 80s before the Berlin Wall came down, when he was working as a newspaper reporter in Berlin and falls heavily in love. It's cliche-ridden, it's overwritten, it's implausible, the love story is really boring. I was incredibly disappointed. Wow. So I'm not going to say anything more about it. Okay. Except to say, if you really want to find out about Douglas Kennedy, read The Dead Heart. It's a great book.
Okay.
This is my book of the week. I would never have thought that a book about fonts would be so arresting. This is a page turner as well.
You're joking.
No, I'm not joking.
As in like Times Roman.
Yes, but not Times Roman, because this guy doesn't like it. Sarah, do you have a favourite font?
Oh, Garamond.
Same.
No.
Yes, Garamond's mine, but I'm thinking of going over to Mrs. Eves after reading this book.
Stop it!
It's a great conversation. I'm not going to ask anyone anymore what the astrological sign is. It's what's your favourite font. This is one of the most beautifully written books about a potentially dry subject that I could ever imagine. The writer Simon Garfield wrote that book about the history of the development of mauve, the colour, the invention of mauve. He's very, very good on these technical matters, but he has a great love of fonts. He loves Mrs. Eves at the moment, which is why I've come over to it.
Does he have all different fonts throughout?
The book is set in Sabon, but at the beginning of a lot of the chapters, he will take what he calls a font break, and he'll write a couple of pages about our font, and it will be then the first paragraph will be set in that font. But what's really fascinating is he gives the history, the backstory behind the development of the fonts. For instance, did you know that Garamond was done in the 17th century? I didn't know it was that old. Me neither. And so you learn an enormous amount about the figures behind it. The person who did, is it Edward Johnson, who did all the font in the underground. A fantastic character called Matthew Carter, who's been very influential American guy in the development of contemporary fonts. The people who developed Comic Sans, he's so funny about the ones he hates. Comic Sans is just like, and anyone who uses Comic Sans, he'll give you a whole sort of personality profile of them.
Well, because that's what I was going to ask, because I've heard, like, you know, when you're doing resumes and things, like you choose certain fonts because they make people feel a certain way.
Well, there's a whole chapter on does a font tell you something about my personality? Can I get more friends using a certain font? At the end of the book, he has the worst fonts in the world. They're really worth reading. But I think what his great achievement is he describes, and this is a very difficult thing to do, to describe the beauty and the technical creation of an actual font. He does that so beautifully and clearly and expressively. It's like reading about food. It's quite an amazing book. I'm going to read it all over again. There's a periodic table at the front, his sort of invention of famous, well-loved and influential fonts, and sort of out there ones.
I see a reality show here somehow.
Yeah, but now there's a bibliography at the back. I'm now going to go and read biographies of various of the people who did the fonts, because they're such fascinating characters. One guy called Eric Gill, we all know Gill Sans, we know it when we see it. That's the thing. We know them when we see them, but when people show them to us, we think, that's on that sign. And now I'm just in this font-saturated world. I can't drive down the road without thinking...
What's the stop sign?
I don't know. And that's the thing. Now I'm sort of frustrated all day because I don't know what anything is. So I'm going to read more about it. It's a great book.
Brilliant stuff. Very unusual. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kate. Now, as part of the Paper Plus book review, we have 3 copies of Gillespie and I to give away, which was the first book that Kate reviewed today, which she liked very much. To be in to win a copy, just tell us in which Scottish city most of the book's action occurs. You can enter online or at the address there. You can see it on screen. And if you're wondering what to do after reading Kate's books, why not try your hand at Fifi's sweet craft idea? She's in. Look at that. It's very stunning stuff. Right after this from Aroha.